Matt Duchene finally goes. The winners and losers of this trade, how it came about, how Matt Duchene snuck out, and so much more on this episode of the Hockey Talk Show. Hey, Joel Palan, welcome to this episode of the Hockey Talk Show. Obviously, the huge move in the National Hockey League last night, we are taping this on Monday, was the trade of Matt Duchene in a three-way trade, which you really don't see all that often in the National Hockey League. I'll tell you what you really don't see is a player being moved in the middle of a game. We'll have reaction on that from Pierre Dorion, general manager of the Ottawa Senators. Lots to get into, lots to discuss on the Hockey Talk Show. Before we start diving into the Matt Duchene trade stuff, how about this? Also, some other action from the Barclays Center. The Avalanche were playing against the Islanders when Duchene was traded after playing just a minute 59 seconds. But take a look at this from the Barclays Center last night. I want to thank my pal Liz for sending this on over to me. This is an entire section of supporters for the referees. I kid you not, I swear. The referees had full force people out there last night at the Barclays Center. Look at this. They took up the entire section here of fans that weren't rooting for the Avalanche, weren't rooting for the New York Islanders. They were rooting for the zebra stripes. That's right. Look, that's a pretty impressive amount of people. I mean, here's the one thing I could tell you that I'm really not surprised about was the fact that there were seats available at the Barclays Center. This is not a surprise, especially on a Sunday night. Maybe with a good team in town, you have a chance at a Friday night, Saturday night sellout, but they don't play a lot of those at the Barclays Center. And Avalanche on a Sunday, you're going to get a ton of empty seats over there in Brooklyn. But regardless of that, without taking a shot at the Islanders, I'm sorry. Look at this. I mean, they were out in full force here. I got an Instagram video here, courtesy of TSN. Let's take a listen to this here. You can see them cheering those guys on. I mean, they were into it the entire game. The reporter for the Islanders who covers their stuff on what are they on MSG? She actually went up and interviewed the guys for a little while. In all the articles I saw, and there was a great read in Bar Down, and there was the piece in the middle of the intermission with the Islanders reporter there. I can't understand why they were there. I don't get why they were there other than this is a really funky, cool thing to do. Let's show our support for the referees. So they showed up and they cheered on the referees. They held up signs that were like, zebras are real people too, or something like that. Every time the refs blew the whistle, they cheered and applauded. They didn't, cheer for goals. They applauded for referee whistles. I don't think they really cheered for many penalties. It was just like the whistle blowing and stuff like that. But they were all out. And I don't know if this was an attention grabbing scheme, or I always think there's some sort of, somebody's, improv everywhere, or somebody's trying to jumpstart a YouTube channel or something like that. I can't exactly figure out why or what, but they were out in full force yesterday over at the Barclays Center, taking up an entire section. And I found it to be pretty hilarious. I found it to be rather funny and definitely worth mentioning here on the start of our show. Let's get into the Matt Duchene trade. We head on over to tsn.ca for the breakdown of the deal. A fairly complicated one here, as it is a three-way swing with the Avalanche receiving a whole slew of players and picks, which I guess is what Joe Sakic's intentions were all along. Obviously, the big names that are moving are on the left side of your screen here, with Kyle Turris going to the Nashville Predators and the Ottawa Senators getting Matt Duchene, who will get into their lineup. And there's a whole bunch of interesting things here. But just to go over the list of what we have here, Avalanche receiving forward Vladislav Kamenev, Samuel Girard, who was in the National Hockey League for 4 or 5 games this year with the Nashville Predators, and they pick up a second-round pick from the Preds. From Ottawa, they get Shane Bowers. They get Andrew Hammond, who's going to be a free agent. They get a first and a third-round pick. So, it's a great slew of picks for Joe Sakic and the Colorado Avalanche. 1, 2, and 3 I mean, you're looking at 10 draft picks in this year, unless they've acquired something else that I'm unaware of, which they might have. I haven't really looked into it. But you got 10 picks now instead of 7. Obviously, the Avalanche are stockpiling here. They want to rebuild on the fly. Look, let's be honest here. This is an Avalanche team that has been a huge disappointment. And you've got the stars, Nate McKinnon, Gabriel Landeskog, Matt Duchene. You know, that's supposed to be your Crosby, Malkin, Kessel. That's supposed to be your Taves, Kane, Panarin. You know, your 1, 2, 3 punches there. And they've all been pretty well disappointing. I'm trying to figure out why and how this Duchene thing sort of came about. I'm not really sure we know. And I don't know if we'll ever really know. The National Hockey League, to its credit and also to critique them a little bit, are incredibly insider. You know, I mean, they don't really let much out that they don't want out. Some of that stuff tends to sneak out after a while eventually. But for the most part, if something happens and they want to keep it a secret, they pretty much keep it a secret. You know, they are the mafia of professional sports. If somebody, you know, sneezes and farts at the same time in the National Football League, there's a story about it instantly. Every blog writes about it. ESPN makes a graphic with a sneeze and a fart. You know, it's everywhere. You can't sneeze and fart. You can't snort in the National Football League and not have somebody know about it. I mean, for Pete's sake, they found out that Colin Kaepernick was kneeling during the national anthem. Who cared enough to look at the players during the national anthem? How would anybody even really notice that? If you remember the beginning of that Kaepernick story, it took so long for that to circulate anyway, because, you know, it's a real, like, it's almost unnoticeable. You know, it's really almost unnoticeable. I think a reporter just happened to be like, hey, what, did you kneel during the thing? What was that all about? And then he answered the question. And then obviously from there went and picked up some steam. But in the National Hockey League, I think one player, was it JT Brown is his name in Tampa, put his arm up during the national anthem. Nobody cared. Nobody cared enough to continue to report about it. But the point is this, that, you know, things happen in the National Hockey League. You know, there have been plenty of stories over the years, and a lot of that stuff just doesn't get talked about for a really, really long time. And I don't know if we'll ever really find out what it was about Duchene that he wanted to be traded from the Avalanche, which, when you think about going back to his draft year in 2009, you know, that was the Tavares, Duchene, Hedman draft. You know, 3 players up at the top, you know, super, you know, important players. Obviously, you've seen what Tavares has done for the Islanders. Hedman has been just as influential, although I don't think he gets as much credit as Tavares does with the Islanders, as he does, and he should, with the Tampa Bay Lightning. But, you know, those were 3 impact players. And if you remember, and I remember this certainly, there was a lot of speculation, especially in the last few hours of the draft that Friday, that the Islanders were going to pick Matt Duchene, that they were going to go with Duchene over Tavares. And I didn't think they should, and they wound up not doing that. But, you know, I remember Matt Duchene, who grew up as a Colorado Avalanche fan, hoping that he would get there. And if you remember, the Islanders had the first pick. You know, it was Tampa with the second pick, and Colorado was the third pick. You know, so he had to literally move past Tampa and the Islanders. And a lot of people thought he'd move past Tampa because Tampa was desperate to get a defenseman. So that Hedman was the natural pick there. Of course, that would have been thrown into a whack if the Islanders picked Hedman, but everybody thought the Islanders were going to pick Tavares, aside from those last-minute rumors, which I think just were around to drum up, you know, insane talk, you know, trade rumor stuff. Who knows? But he got to go to the team that he grew up loving when he was a kid, and that's a super rarity. Like, that never, ever really happens. So you think that's a match made in heaven, that, you know, when he puts that jersey on in the draft, that he's going to be a lifer as far as the Colorado Avalanche go. And here we are. You know, I mean, granted, it's been 8 years later, but 8 years later and the honeymoon is over, and he wants out, and he finally gets out. So we look at the pieces of the deal here, and, you know, Kyle Turris gets involved from the Senators' standpoint. The first question I had is, why in the hell did Nashville not just try and scoop up Duchene for themselves? And, you know, like, I wondered about that for quite a while here. Why would they let Duchene out of their grips? I said this for a while, that makes the most sense. They're trying to replace the scoring of James Neal. You always need a good center. Mike Fisher, no longer with the team, retires. They want to fill that void a little bit there, so you don't need to go out and get a first line center. Certainly Kyle Turris is one of the best second line centers in the game. But I just wonder, why didn't Nashville try harder to get Matt Duchene and keep them for himself? And we'll hear a little bit more from Pierre Dorian in a moment on the anatomy of this deal and how it came about, because it is pretty damn interesting. And I think the answer is right here on the right side of your screen. I just think that they couldn't pony up enough for crazy Joe Sakic. Joe Sakic wanted a landslide of draft picks. He wanted a whole bunch of, prospects. And that's what he got. Kamenev, who knows? He's not really an important part of this deal. Girard is obviously the big centerpiece. He's the defenseman that he wanted. We heard that Sakic wanted a defenseman. He got it. Girard is one of those interesting cases where, he's a rookie. He's 19 years old. He has that 9-game sort of barrier with the Nashville Predators, where if he plays past the 9 games, they burn 1 year of his contract. If they send him down, they get to keep him for another year, and he got to play a little bit in the league, and they got to take a look at him. Obviously, there was an evaluation period here with the Nashville Predators. I think he saw 4 games or so, or I forget what the amount it was that he actually wound up playing in the league this year. But clearly, he didn't pass that 9-game barrier. And clearly, there was discussion, because I think the Preds said to themselves, and this is all speculation on my part, but I'm sure Boyle said to himself, David Boyle said, look, he's not going to be here. He's 19. We're going to be without him for this year. Who knows if he's going to make the squad next year? And we're probably looking at him being an impact 2 to 3 years down the line. Because then you think about it, he doesn't play this year. He's a question mark to make the team next year. Let's say worst case scenario, he doesn't. 3rd year now, he finally makes the team. Now you got to get him acclimated into the National Hockey League, and that takes a whole year. So you're 2 to 3, 4 years away from really seeing an impact from this guy, and you can move him now and pick up a piece that you think can help you. Because certainly there's an abundance of defensemen in the Nashville Predator organization, as there always is. And you have a team that went to the Stanley Cup final last year and would most likely like to go back there this year. And, they're playing okay. They're playing okay hockey right now. The Preds, checking on their record here, not in the top where they want to be. They sit just out of that wild card spot as we check NHL.com. Just out of that wild card spot, the Preds sit. There you go. Sorry if you're looking at this, if you're listening to us on the podcast, we always kind of talk about the visuals there, but the Preds 14 games in, 16 points, 7-5-2. So they're over 500. It's not an awful year for the Nashville Predators. But certainly you need there's some room for improvement. There's some room for, you got to get up there and leapfrog all those teams, starting one with Colorado, Vancouver, and everybody else sitting above them. So the Preds have some work to do, losing Mike Fisher, losing James Neal. You get back a little bit of scoring, more scoring, I think, in Kyle Turris than in Mike Fisher, and you get that second line defenseman that can sit there and line up on your second line for the Nashville Predators. Offense, always a bit of an issue for the Preds, so they solved that there with them. But again, I looked at this trade last night when it first happened, and I wondered to myself, why wouldn't the Nashville Predators try and make a move on this themselves? Why did they why they let Ottawa in and then lose Matt Duchene? Don't you think Matt Duchene would have been great? Matt Duchene would have been but Matt Duchene is the better player than Kyle Turris. I know everybody's trying to give Kyle the respect he deserves, and he does deserve that, but let's be honest with each other. Matt Duchene's the better player here. So you got to think the Predators wanted to just scoop him up, but I just don't think that they had enough to give up. I don't think that David Poile wanted to give up a first, second, and third round. That just doesn't seem appealing to the Preds, who always really draft very, very well. So that was one of the reasons why I think that they just couldn't get it done, because when you look at the return between the two deals, when you look at the return of what they got on the right side, they got a forward, defenseman, second round pick, another forward, a goalie, first and third round pick. I mean, that's not a bad day. if Kamenev doesn't pan out, Andrew Hammond walks eventually, he's kind of a throwaway into the deal. If Shane Bowers doesn't pan out, I know there's some prospects behind Shane. You still walk away with Samuel Girard, who in all indications is a top 6 defenseman, a first, second, and third round pick. What you turn that into in this upcoming draft will certainly be interesting. Now, I don't think it will be a high draft pick by any means, because both of the Senators and the Predators, I think, are going to finish fairly well. But it could be in the middle, 15, 14, could be 20th. It doesn't really matter. You're getting all those extra picks. It's good currency for Joe Sakic. I have to say that Joe Sakic, held his ground. He knew, I talked about this the other day, he's going to reach a tipping point where he's going to start losing value on Matt Duchene. Time is ticking on his contract. Everybody knows he wants to go. It's only going to be so long until he's got to make a move for less than what he was originally offered. And, he did okay. He did okay. Now, we're going to see what he was looking for. And I'm going to show you one of the teams that was interested in Matt Duchene. And we know what was offered. We know what at least Colorado had asked for and what the other team said no about. Hint, hint, it's the Islanders. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But overall, when you take a look at the mix here, it turned out to be okay. What transpired really between Pierre Dorion and Kyle Turris, I'm still a little fuzzy about. There's a little bit of controversy there, and I'm going to get into part of the National Hockey League and how they sort of protect their stories. Because Pierre Dorion did a ton of interviews. They did a press conference. I'm going to have some of Matt Duchene for you coming up here. So stay tuned for that. And we're going to hear from Pierre Dorion. I thought Pierre Dorion's most interesting line of questioning came during Hockey Central at noon. It wasn't so much during the press conference. It was during Hockey Central at noon. So we will get to that. But the weird part about this, the controversial part is, the Sens were trying to re-sign Kyle Turris. They couldn't do it. So what wound up happening was this deal first started with Ottawa and Colorado. They got their deal done. Duchene to Ottawa, Kyle Turris comes back the other way, and all the other pieces. Then it was up to Joe Sakic to figure out Kyle Turris to Nashville and what Nashville was going to return back. So really the hinge of this door swing was Joe Sakic and the Colorado Avalanche. It wasn't like Nashville had any real discussion with Ottawa. You always kind of tend to think that that's what happened. They all kind of sit together and try and figure it out. It wasn't. It was Ottawa driving this little ship here. But basically, Ottawa sat there with Kyle Turris trying to get a deal done. They couldn't. The issue apparently wasn't money, it was term. Kyle was asking for 7 or 8 years, and Ottawa didn't want to do that. And I think Pierre Dorion is lying. Clearly there's something else going on here, because there just doesn't make a lot of sense. I've never really been a part of a negotiation in the National Hockey League. I did a lot of things during my time while working there, but I never really heard of a negotiation. I certainly read about plenty of negotiations, and I know that they could be a little nonsensical and not go exactly how one would think, like when you're trading baseball cards when you were a kid, or, trying to trade snacks at lunchtime or whatever. You ask for this, they say no, they come back with something, you say no, you go back and forth until everybody gets what they want. That apparently wasn't really happening here, because Kyle wanted 7 or 8 years and Ottawa didn't want to give it to him. You think at some point somebody would have said, well, how about 6? Whether that was from Ottawa's side or Kyle's side, apparently that was never said in the negotiations. And Kyle wound up going somewhere else. And as soon as he goes to Nashville, he signs a 6-year, $36 million extension. So he wouldn't take 6 from Ottawa, or apparently it wasn't brought up, and he takes 6 immediately. Just again, and we'll get into this a little bit more with the anatomy of the trade, what had wound up happening was Joe Sakic had to work out the deal between Nashville and Colorado before he could pull the trigger on sending Duchene to Ottawa. And part of that was letting David Poile of the Nashville Predators talk with Kyle Turris. So it was Pierre Dorion over in the Ottawa Senators, general manager, who had to give permission. So Joe had to ask Pierre for permission. Pierre had to give permission to David Poile, and they did. And Poile obviously wasn't going to make this move unless he could sign Kyle to a cap friendly deal for the Predators, and they can have a piece that they can keep for the next bunch of years here. So that's how it all came about. But it's kind of weird that Pierre didn't say, well, we'll give you 6. So either Pierre didn't want Kyle here or Kyle wanted to move on. That's the story that they're protecting that I'm sure will come about hopefully in the next couple of days. But as of right now, we're not going to know. Maybe we have to wait till the end of the season. But somebody didn't want to go, because if you say you want 7 or 8 years and that side says no, somebody is going to say, well, can we do 6 then? Can you give me 6 years then for $1 million extra so I can make it up? Can you make that work? Well, then no. All right. Well, then at least you know. But according to them, they just never really got to that point in the negotiation. How could you not get to that point? You can get to that point in 5 minutes of the negotiation. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Somebody clearly didn't want to go there to begin with, whether that was Pierre Dorion or Kyle Turris. I don't know, but clearly somebody was protecting somebody. Maybe Dorian was protecting himself because Kyle didn't want to sign there really. And that's why he was asking for an 8-year deal, which is a little crazy for Kyle Turris. Maybe that was the anatomy of it all. I'm not really quite sure. I have a feeling they're protecting Kyle, that Kyle didn't want to go there. At the end of the day, you put a gun to my head, I'm going to say they're protecting Kyle, that he didn't want to go there, because you don't want him getting booed when he goes back to Ottawa, because he was there for so long. He contributed, he did a lot of great things for the Ottawa Senators. So you don't want him going in a bad taste in your mouth for the fans, knowing that he never really demanded a trade, but wouldn't really agree to a contract extension, thus forcing the hand of Pierre Dorion. Here's Matt Duchene sporting number 95 in the Ottawa Senators red sweater right there. Duchene, I forget why he wore 9 in Colorado, but that was the number that he wore while with the Avalanche. And he wore 5 when he was a kid, 9 not available, neither is 19. So he opted for 95, as you can see right there. The odd thing is the Senators and the Avalanche are traveling overseas to play each other in the Global Series in Sweden. They'll play 2 games over there. Friday and Saturday, they'll be together a whole bunch. That is pretty awkward when you just made a trade with a team and you have moved on. A couple of other interesting moments here. Last week, this is November 3rd. Today's November 6th. Darren Dreger reported, it's believed Ottawa, Colorado, and Nashville were in discussion on a 3-way trade involving Matt Duchene going to the Sens. Talks have ended. No deal. The difficult part there was the Nashville, Colorado part. Now, from what I understand from what Pierre Dorion said, and we'll hear from him in a moment, they had their deal done. Ottawa, Colorado's deal was done. Kyle was going to go there. Now, what could have happened, and not that it would have been bad, but what could have happened is they could have made their deal and Kyle Turris would have been a Colorado Avalanche, and then he would have sat there for who knows how long until Joe Sakic was able to move him along. Sort of kind of what happened with Mike Piazza. Remember when Mike Piazza was traded from the Dodgers? He went to Miami. And he sat in Miami for, I think, a week or so until Miami and the Mets made a deal and he came to New York, which is where he wanted to be in the first place, which was kind of an awkward situation because for that whole week, up in New York at least, I remember they were doing nothing but showing Mike Piazza highlights. I'm like, this is what Mike Piazza did last. They were showing Miami Marlin highlights. Well, back then they were the Florida Marlins. This is what Mike Piazza did in the game last night for Florida. I know we don't show Florida Marlins highlights, but he's coming here, so you might as well take a look. Like, it was like this weird week of transition. That's got to be tough on a player, knowing that you're on a team only for a short while. So Joe Sakic made sure to avoid that. Pierre Dorion does point that out in their conversation. Last time a player was traded in the middle of a game, January 12th, 2012, Mike Camilleri from Montreal to Calgary during the game while playing in Boston. It was a pretty awkward conversation. Let me see. Do I have it here? I do. Here's the moment that Matt Duchene left the rink. And again, if you're on the podcast listening, my apologies, but here's Blake Como being taken off the ice due to an injury, and you can see right there behind him, there's Matt Duchene's helmet as he's going right behind him. There goes Como, and into the frame goes Duchene. That's the last he'll be seen in a Colorado Avalanche sweater, as he was told after playing just 1 minute and 59 seconds in the game against the Islanders Sunday night at the Barclays Center. Hey, get off the ice. You've been traded. It wasn't until the second period that he wound up leaving the Barclays Center. We know that because good on the MSG crew. They were all over it camera-wise. They had shots of him leaving the Barclays Center, and, I'm sure he said goodbye to his teammates in the middle of the first period, but somebody clearly radioed down to the bench and said, hey, this deal was done. Now, I was pretty surprised because you don't often see a player traded in the middle of the game. Either you know he's going to be traded and you keep him out of the lineup altogether, or you don't. Now, what's interesting, and again, the anatomy of this deal, Duchene was a Senator a week ago. Dorian said our part of the deal was done. He just had to see if he could swing the Nashville thing. So, Pierre had been watching all these games just hoping that he doesn't get hurt. And Colorado clearly didn't want to keep him out of the lineup for, an extended period of time. But, to be honest with you, I would have. I think the biggest mistake that Joe Sakic made in this is the continuing of play for Matt Duchene. Now, I know if he keeps him out of the lineup, it's going to create a media buzz and people are going to get out of control and ask him nonstop. But you know what? You take those risks versus not getting the return that you were trying to get in the first place. I'd rather be sitting there answering. And look, you can go radio silent. You can go no comment. Matt Duchene can sit there and go, I don't know. They haven't told me anything other than I'm a healthy scratch. And you can send Matt Duchene away. You'd be like, hey, you don't have to show up at the rink, man. Just go do your thing. We're going to figure you out in a couple of days here. And if we can't get the deal done, we'll bring it back. Now, I know that's of embarrassing stature, but nothing's worse than Matt Duchene, catching a puck to the face or breaking a leg or whatever and being out for months. And now you don't have anything in return. I mean, imagine what kind of a colossal mistake that could be. So for a group of general managers who are super, super patient, I think he made a little bit of a mistake there. He rolled the dice a little bit there. That Joe Sakic. Here is Matt Duchene from the press conference today. Now, you would think that there would be some, hard feelings between him and Joe, but apparently not the case whatsoever.
Yeah, for sure, relief that it's kind of behind me. It was a long time, obviously, going through everything. I have nothing but great things to say about my time in Colorado, the people there. It's pretty tough to, there's no such thing as a perfect human being, but I think for me, Joe Sakic is pretty darn close. So he's a guy I looked up to my whole life. And, a lot of people, I think, pinned us against each other a little bit at times, and it was never that way. We had a great relationship the whole time, and we both had a tear in our eye yesterday when he talked to me. So I have nothing but great things to say. It was my favorite team as a kid, and it was an honor to have played there. And now turning the page here with coming here to Ottawa, I'm beyond excited. 3 hours from home, back in my home province with a team that I've been keeping my eye on for a long time. I think just to see the way these guys play and the skill level, and it's a great market, great fans. So I'm very excited, and I can't wait to get started.
Okay, a couple two treat things here, as they say back in the old Queens neighborhood. Let me tell you a couple two treat things. One, he calls Joe Sakic. There's no such thing as a perfect human being, but the closest thing is Joe Sakic. Really? I would thought there'd be a lot more animosity between the two. In fact, he even said, look, people tried to pin us against each other, but it wasn't the case. I am shocked to hear that. Again, I think he's just kind of maybe saying nice things on his way out, which he should be doing, Two, he's excited to be a senator. Look, I think he's excited to be out of Colorado. I think if he was really excited to be a senator, he would be already talking about contract extensions. Now, he's got a year after this one, so they can't talk about it until July 1st. But, I think he would have said something to the effect of, look, I'm looking forward to being here and maybe winning a championship, which he all did say. But, I'm looking forward to maybe a long-term thing. That was never really said in this press conference, at least none that I really saw. So I don't know how excited he is. The Senators have him under contract for this year and next year. I'm sure they'd like to keep him for longer. doesn't really matter to them. I mean, they just gave up Andrew Hammond, who they were going to lose anyway. They gave up Kyle Turris, who, if our theories are correct, they were going to lose anyway. So Shane Bowers is really what they gave up for, and a second, for or a first and a third. Was theirs was the first and the third. All right, so they gave up a first and a third. Yeah, they gave up a first and a third in Shane Bowers. So okay, yeah, you don't really want to lose. You don't really want to lose all that and get nothing in return. But for 2 years, it might be worth the risk. It might be worth the gamble. I think it would be worth the gamble if he walks at the end of this, especially if the Senators are able to go deep, which, let's be honest, they're a more improved team right now. You essentially really gave up a first rounder, Shane Bowers, and a third. Thirds get traded all the time. So first and about, I think it's a good deal for the Sens. I really do. I think Pierre Dorion sort of stole one here. I really, really do. We're talking about Matt Duchene here and the big move made the other day. It's the Hockey Talk Show. We're available on Facebook and YouTube, where we will be streaming live very, very soon on your favorite podcatcher, whether it's iTunes, the TuneIn Radio app, Stitcher, or Podbean. You can subscribe, rate, and review us over there so that, we can move a little bit higher up in the scale of podcasts. And, of course, make sure you're subscribing on Facebook and YouTube. Don't just subscribe, hit the bell on YouTube, and don't just like our page, but follow us over there on Facebook. We're talking Matt Duchene. We're going to go heavy on that. Right now, we're going to go to the Hockey Central show today. That's on NHL Network and Sportsnet 590. We're going to hear the guys, Darren Millard, who I'm going to call to task a little bit here because he protects Dorion a little bit and doesn't press him as much. See, this goes back to what I said before, where the National Hockey League, here's how it works. All the reporters, all these insiders, they work for TSN, they work for ESPN, they work for, what's the other one? Sportsnet. They all work for these companies, but believe me, they all get the sign of approval from the National Hockey League. And you don't get a story unless the National Hockey League approves. And that's not to say that Gary Bettman is sitting up there, kiss my ring, and I'll tell you what you need to know. But there is this very protective core where if one of these, like TSN and Sportsnet and ESPN, they're not out to break stories. Like when you go to the NFL pressers, and I've been to plenty of press conferences in my day. I've hosted press conferences. I've been to press conferences, not just in sports, but in entertainment and everything else. You can get some people pushing sometimes. I was at the press conference for Led Zeppelin when they got back together a few years ago, and it was a one-off thing. And they took question after question after question, from CNN to NBC to Fox to the New York Times to the Wall Street, you name it. Every single person asked the same thing. Are you guys going to get back together? Are you guys going to tour? And they could not have been more forceful in saying, no, this was a one-time thing. There was awkwardness in the room. Everybody knew Robert Plant was the only one who didn't want to tour, and the rest of the band did. And they kept asking, and they kept pushing, and it didn't matter how many times he said no. They kept going. I mean, it got so awkward. At one point, a guy from CNN was like, come on, really? Are you not going to get together? And Robert Plant just looked at him and was like, are you stupid? Like, what part of no don't you, like, really got nasty with him. So I've seen all sorts of situations. In the National Hockey League, you're never going to get that. You're never going to get TSN, Sportsnet, ESPN. You're never going to get the independents pushing hard. I know you're not going to get that from the NHL Network. I don't expect that from the NHL Network, but everybody protects the stories. And you'll hear this with Darren Millard. I'm telling you, you're going to hear it. So here is Pierre Dorion up on Sportsnet 590, The Fan, and the NHL Network this afternoon talking about the trade. They started off by asking Pierre if he was surprised that Kyle Turris got 6 years in Nashville when they couldn't come to a contract agreement. Why? And did they know about the 6 years? And did he know that 6 years was a possibility? Here's Pierre Dorion from this afternoon.
Contract that Kyle ends up signing with Nashville. And you said it was never on the table with you. Had you, so that's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They always talked about 7 and 8 years, and now that he's a player of Nashville's property, I don't know if it's right for me to discuss this at any further length, but I'm trying to be as open as possible.
Deflecting.
Can you tell me whether or not, did you bring up 6 years or a shorter deal, or 6 years, let's talk in specifics, 6 years, and they turned it down? They didn't want to talk about 6 years?
We never really discussed it.
Okay. That was, so were you surprised at 6 years that he signs for that term?
I don't know. You're catching me a bit off guard here. I'm just happy for Kyle. You know, Kyle was great here, and I'm just happy for him that he got a contract that he's happy with and they're happy with. But that really was never any specifics that we got into. They made it very clear to us that they were looking for 7 or 8 years, as everyone reported.
I apologize for
Works better when my mic is on. Why is Darren Millard apologizing? Why would he apologize? For pressing, for doing his job, for asking questions. That's your job. People want to know, especially the Ottawa Senators people. Why did my guy just get... Now, I'm sure none of the Ottawa fans are really all that upset unless you're a diehard Kyle Turris fan. You're coming out ahead of this. You're getting Matt Duchene over Kyle Turris. Good for you. You got him signed for another 2 years. You guys are golden. But still, why are you apologizing? Granted, he pressed a little bit, but why are you apologizing? Because it doesn't make sense. And Pierre Dorian's sitting there going, well, we didn't really know. They were pressing for 7 or 8 years. We didn't really come up. They didn't get into specifics. What the hell are you talking about? They didn't get into specifics. You crazy? Are you kidding me? They didn't get into specifics. That was the best part. And I also like Pierre's previous deflection there where he's like, well, saying that he's property of the Avalanche now, because in the National Hockey League and in all sports, really, you're not allowed, if you're a manager, you're not allowed to talk about players that aren't your property. You know, you can't sit there as Pierre Dorian and be like, well, I would love to. Who was the general manager that screwed that up? Who was it? Just a couple of years ago, came in acting all tough. I think he got fired already. Oh, no, it was Craig McTavish. Yeah, when Craig McTavish finally got named as the general manager of Edmonton, and he's like, we would like to get a guy like so-and-so. I forget who he was talking about, like Chara or something. Like, yeah, we'd like to get a Zdeno Chara. And everyone's like, no, don't say, are you crazy? And he got fined by the league. I believe he did, or he should have. You can't just go saying, oh, we'd like to get this player. You can say, oh, Zdeno Chara is a great player, or obviously we know how important Sid is to the game. He's a great player. But you can't be like, oh, I'd like to get so-and-so, because that's against the rules. Because they think, like, if you say, hey, we want to go out and get so-and-so, that so-and-so might turn around and be like, well, I want to play there, so trade me. You know, it's just, they don't want it happening. It's just something you don't do. So Pierre Dorian pulled out the whole, well, he's property of Nashville card. But come on, those rules are swayed a little bit when it's a former player that you just traded. You can certainly say, well, he's really skilled and he's fast and Nashville's getting what they wanted, so on and so forth. So he pulled out that card. I thought it was pretty interesting. We get a little bit more of the background of this deal here when Darren Millard asks Pierre Dorian if he was surprised that Matt Duchene was in the lineup in Brooklyn to take on the Islanders last night.
No, because I was at my son's birthday supper, and I got a call from Joe at about 20 after 5, and it seemed that the part that we were all waiting for was the agreement between Nashville and Colorado. Joe and I had a deal now for about a week or so, and we knew no matter what we'd get this done between the two of us. And Joe, out of respect to Kyle, didn't want to put him in his lineup and then trade him afterwards. He just felt it wasn't the right thing to do. And my respect for Joe Sakic just keeps growing day by day, because he was not the one that was holding it up. It was the agreement between Nashville and Colorado, and for them to get the deal done. I think, David asked permission to talk to Kyle, and there was a contract that needed to be done between those two parties. And it took me, contracts usually can't be done in 5 minutes, and it's probably took closer to an hour. And Joe gave me his word as soon as the other parties to agree to a contract, they'd pull him out of the lineup, and they did that. And I was praying that he wouldn't get hurt in those 2 or 3 shifts that he played.
So that was the situation there. Pierre Dorion talking about that. Look, there's a bunch of crazy things in this little scenario here that Duchene was allowed to play over the course of the day. You heard him say we had a deal done a week ago. I mean, how you don't pull him out of the lineup a week ago, I don't know. Just deal with the media firestorm. Respectable on the part of Joe Sakic to not want to pull in Kyle Turris, knowing full well that he was trading him, that he was a part of another deal. And good on all the general managers for making sure that this deal was done the right way, where Kyle was able to speak with Nashville and they were able to get the job done. So like you kind of can hear there, Pierre is sitting there saying, well, look, I didn't have a lot to do with the Nashville aspect of it. My aspect of it was done, and it was really Joe working on it, which is why we were waiting, which is why it was a surprise to me that I got the call when I was at a party, that, okay, it was finally going to get done, and we were pulling Matt out of the lineup, so on and so forth. So kind of interesting the way that this whole thing came together, and also good on, Pierre Dorion for allowing Kyle Turris to go out there and get the deal specifically that he wanted. Again, when you have Matt Duchene dangling there and you're improving your club, it does make things a little bit easier, but certainly all the guys put their egos aside to get a deal done, which was best for all sides. A little bit more on the anatomy of the deal here from Pierre Dorion. This clip courtesy of Sportsnet 590 The Fan up in Toronto and the National Hockey League Network, Hockey Central at noon. Came
to an agreement, or over the last 10 days, we were very close, or like maybe it was just, okay, maybe it got to be Hammond or the third rounder, but the biggest part of the deal has been done for, I'd say, about 10 days or so, 7-10 days. I tell you that it would agreed upon. And as I said before, it was Joe didn't want to do that to Kyle, to just put him in his lineup and then have him to trade him at the trade deadline or along the way. And I totally agreed with Joe's perspective on that. I don't think Kyle deserved to go through that. And if he was going to go anywhere, it could be somewhere he could go long term. And both Joe and I had no issues with that.
Okay.
See, so there's the thing. Long term, Kyle had his needs. Ottawa ready to walk away from him. Obviously, I wonder if any sort of discussion happened between Kyle and Colorado. I guess we'll really never know. I would assume not, since Sakic was hell-bent on getting a defenseman, and Shane Bowers sort of filled the role of a forward there. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how much that happened. Clearly, it seems to me that Colorado wanted to move Turris really fast to get the piece that they wanted, which was that young defenseman that we had heard from the very beginning. That was what he was always interested in: young defenseman, young defenseman, young defenseman. So there you go. Speaking of young defensemen that they can get under contract for a little while here, I know Isles fans, myself as well, was certainly a little upset because we thought that there was a fair amount that was on the table for Colorado if the Islanders were to obtain Matt Duchene, as we honestly thought that Hamonic would have been part of the deal, judging by Pelech and Pulak coming up, and the fact that we had this now certain abundance at defense. Even though we were going to go younger, we all kind of understood, even though it kind of sucked that Hamonic was a great defenseman and Hamonic had a cap friendly deal, it would be hard to move on from him. But we kind of understood, okay, well, if it was in order to get what we really needed, and we do have this young defenseman who could probably be okay, then it would be worth it. So we were all under the assumption that Hamonic and maybe like Michael Dal Cole or Anthony Beauvillier were certainly up for grabs. Maybe that would have been sort of a combination of a deal. I think a lot of Islander fans could probably live with Dal Cole going, who hasn't really caught on in the National Hockey League just yet. I think Beauvillier would have been a blow, but that would have been understandable. So Dal Cole, Beauvillier, and Hamonic for Duchene certainly would have been nice. But as we find out here from Arthur Staple, who's a genius in his own right, great at covering the New York Islanders, what was really discussed, the Avs wanted Hamonic, Matthew Barzal, Sorokin, who is a huge goalie prospect coming out of the KHL, and a first-round draft pick for Matt Duchene. Hamonic, Barzal, Sorokin, and a first. That's insanity. Nobody on this planet would have made that deal. Nobody. So good on Garth Snow for not being pressured into that. I mean, that's just crazy talk. Usually you start somewhere and there's long negotiations. Even if this was a first offering of insanity from Joe, I'm not surprised that Garth never even counted or said anything. Maybe Garth went back to him and said, I'll give you Hamonic and Dal Cole on a first, but that's it. Who knows? But good on him for not trading Barzal. He just had a 5-assist night last night. And believe me, I'm not just saying that for hindsight. I fell in love with 13 from the first second I saw him in training camp this year. I mean, from the first game that I had to watch on NHL.com because it wasn't on regular cable TV here in New York. The guy had speed. He had ability. He holds on to the puck, which I love, which the Islanders were sorely missing ever since they lost Franz Nielsen. And, you just can't put a value. I'm not like a straight up stats guy. I like a little stats mixed with feel. And Barzal just gives you a good feel. The guy's confident on the ice, knows how to pass the puck. He's got a great shot, but he skates like lightning. And he doesn't give up on the puck. He's not afraid to get hit. That's everything you want in a hockey player. And that's what they have with Barzal. Sorokin, certainly with Halak. I think Halak and Greiss are a great 1-2 punch for the Islanders this year. But moving forward, Sorokin might be your answer. And, of course, you want to hold on to all those first-round draft picks that you can. Certainly that price tag was far too much for the New York Islanders. I know there was talk about Duchene going to Pittsburgh. I never really saw that happening. Duchene to Nashville, I thought, was a possibility, and now we know that there was that 3-way deal in the mix. But it's understandable that this was the deal. By the way, Pierre Dorian did say in other interviews that they were seeking Matt Duchene for years. In fact, as soon as Pierre Dorian was named general manager, I think he had a contract. I think he had a discussion very early on with Joe Sakic of like, hey, if you ever get tired of Matt Duchene, I'll take him. Come, you let me know, which is common discussion between general managers. They say that stuff all the time. Some don't like to say it because they're tipping their hand to who they really want. Some will make up stuff because, they'll just want to just talk. But, who's not going to say that about, anybody? I'm sure Pierre Dorian went over to Chicago and said, hey, I'll take Jonathan Toews off your hands. If you really, I'm sure that stuff kind of happens. But clearly this is a guy that Pierre Dorian loves, that was sought after. As soon as Duchene's desire to be traded came out, I'm sure those conversations were heated between Ottawa and Colorado. And here we are all this time later, about 14, 15 games into the season, depending on the team. And Duchene was finally traded when we thought he was going to be traded at the deadline, at the draft, July 1st, before training camp, during training camp, before the season starts, like all these times, like when is Matt Duchene going to get traded? And here is the day that he is finally moved and be wearing number 95 now for the Ottawa Senators. It's going to be weird to see him over there for a little bit, and super awkward that their first interaction is going to be during the Global Series this weekend as both teams are traveling over to Sweden as the NHL continues to expand its foothold into a global market rather than just a North American sport. A lot of fun stuff dissected on the show today. This was a fun breakdown. I knew the Duchene deal was going to be big. I didn't think it was going to be 3-team deal big. And Kyle Turris moving on with his deal, getting the extension. It's pretty big news in the National Hockey League. I'm glad we were able to dissect this. I would have loved it if we could have done this one live and actually taken your calls, but we will get to that soon. I absolutely promise. In the meantime, you could always shoot us a tweet at Hockey Talk Show. We have links on our website, hockeytalkshow.com. You can shoot us a message on Instagram, direct message us there at Hockey Talk Show, or at Hockey Talk Show on the Facebook page as well. We just passed 200 likes and follows or whatever on Facebook. So, we're 3 weeks into this. That's pretty big for us. We're growing exponentially quicker than I thought we would. And that's because people are telling other people about it. They're sharing it on their social media. So continue to do that. If you enjoy, just dissecting rumors and games and the managers and the coaches and the players. We try and get deep into it, which, like we kind of just talked about here with Hockey Central, they're not going to really get into all that stuff, and nor should they. I respect all those guys. They're hot on the trail. It's not like Darren Dreger and Bob McKenzie aren't trying to break news, especially as far as trades go. But they don't really dig all that deep, and we'll try and do that here, and we'll try and dissect things. Certainly with my knowledge prior to being in radio as a member of the National Hockey League with the New York Islanders, and just by my experience of following the game for all these years. So thanks for joining us. Again, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Facebook, YouTube, hockeytalkshow.com has all the links. This was a fun, quick hit. I'll see you guys on the next shift.